صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على الأشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين، حبيبي إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيت الله الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We would like to welcome you all to our 2025 Shahr Ramadan program here at the Islamic Center of America, hosted by the United Network of Islam. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with another opportunity in seeking closest to Him in this holy month of Ramadan. May Allah accept and reward all your efforts in worship in these blessed days and nights, inshallah. Before we get started with tonight's program, we would like to recite some verses from the Holy Quran. Please help me welcome Brother Hassan Karami to the stage. Ba'd salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
على محمد وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, I'll be reciting from Surah An-Naml, Ayah 20, for those of you who'd like to follow along. Surah An-Naml is Surah 27, Ayah 20, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وتفقد الطير فقال ما لي لا أرى الهدهد أم كان من الغائبين. لأعذبنه عذابا شديدا أو لأذبحنه أو ليأتيني بسلطان مبين. فمكث غير بعيد فقال أحطت بما لم تحط به وجئتك من سبأ بنبأ يقين. إني وجدت امرأة تملكهم وأوتيت من كل شيء ولها عرش عظيم. وجدتها وقومها يسجدون للشمس من دون الله وزين لهم الشيطان أعمالهم وزين لهم الشيطان أعمالهم فصدهم عن السبيل فهم لا يهتدون ألا يسجدوا لله الذي يخرج الخبأ في السماوات والأرض ويعلم ما تخفون وما تعلنون الله لا إله إلا هو رب العرش العظيم قال سننظر أصدقت أم كنت من الكاذبين اذهب بكتابي هذا فألقه إليهم ثم تول عنهم فانظر ماذا يرجعون فانظر ماذا يرجعون قالت يا أيها الملأ إني ألقي كتاب كريم إني ألقي إلي كتاب كريم إنه من سليمان وإنه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألا تعلوا علي وأتوني مسلمين إني ألقي إلي كتاب كريم إنه من سليمان وإنه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ألا تعلوا علي وأتوني مسلمين صدق الله العلي العظيم اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على رسول الله وآله الأطهار على رسول الله وآله الأطهار صلوات
Thank you, Brother Hassan, for that beautiful recitation. If we can give him another loud salawat. Muhammad wa ali Just a couple announcements before we get started, inshallah. There are question QR codes in the front where the UNI table is. If you would like to scan and submit your question, please scan that code and it'll direct you to a link to submit your questions, inshallah. Alhamdulillah, through the tawfiq of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the efforts of the sisters and brothers of the UNI, we have made an initiative to truly dedicate our efforts in reviving the Medina bookstore in hopes that we can sincerely give proper Islamic education about our beliefs from our grand respected scholars of the modern era that have truly done great work for the sake of Allah and Islam. The Medina bookstore will be open every night during and after the program in the month of Ramadan. If you have any questions, please see me or one of the organizers after the program, inshallah. In the holy month of Ramadan, we are taking sponsors each night to help us with our UNI programming, bookstore, and so much more. In our traditions, we usually always donate on behalf of our deceased. General nightly donations are set to $100 per night and $300 to sponsor a suhoor with a scholar of event. If you would like to sponsor a night, please meet with me or one of the organizers after the program, inshallah. Thanks donations on the behalf of all the Muslimin and Muslimat, the Shuhada. If we can please recite Surah Al-Fatiha ba'da salat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Thank you. Make sure to keep up with the UNI on Instagram. That's at UNIORG_. Again, that's at UNIORG_ for weekly programs and events throughout the year. For those who don't have social media, please meet with me or one of the organizers after the program, and we'll put you in the WhatsApp announcements chat where everything in there will be also sent, inshallah. So without further ado, please help me welcome Samahat al-Sheikh Ali Nazzal. بعد 3 صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطاهرين الطاهرين المعصومين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم كن لي وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا وذليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه بها طويلة رحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. The reminder is dua al-hujjah, dua Allahumma kun li waliyika, the reports and traditions that we have from the Ahlul Bayt. It's very important to keep it constant during the last 10 nights. Our attachment to Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam is at an all-time high during these nights. If there was going to be one takeaway, I was sitting here and sometimes when you give lectures, like looking for something to give to, not wasting time. And I said if I had one thing, if there was going to be one legacy, one takeaway, one outcome from the lecture, is that the legacy of the Ahlul Bayt would facilitate the audience. Meaning when a few days ago or every now and then I mentioned something that we have from the Ahlul Bayt, something that we inherited from the Prophet's family. So for example, Nahjul Balagha is a work with the orations, sermons and sayings and letters of Amir al-Mu'mineen that was compiled in the 4th century. It's something that we have. It's a treasure that we have. Last night we talked about Al-Munajat, the whispered prayer of the month of Sha'ban that is attributed to Amir al-Mu'mineen. We've spoken about Dua Qumayl. And today I want to make sure and I want to highlight another gem in our turath, in our heritage. And that is a book known as As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyya, or as translated, the Psalms of the Prophet's family. The Psalms of As-Sajjad, As-Sajjad meaning our 4th Imam, Imam As-Sajjad alayhi salam. Imam As-Sajjad has 2 legacies that he left us. We have a lot of reports and traditions, individual reports, single accounts from Imam As-Sajjad, salamullah alayhi, the 4th Imam. But we have 2 important works. Outside of just individual single reports and traditions that we have from him, we have 2 important works. So alongside Nahjul Balagha, or alongside, for example, the Quran, after the Quran, and alongside Nahjul Balagha, we have a book known as As-Sahifat As-Sajjadiyya. It's translated into English by William Chittick. So if you're looking for a translation, look for the translation of William Chittick. So this is the book. It's available online, and I believe it's available in most bookstores. I don't believe that they have it here in the bookstore at the ICA. I want to read to you guys from the Dua Maqarim al-Akhlaq, the supplication of the noble character traits or the noble moral traits. It's a very famous dua that's recited by the mu'mineen, and it's specifically one that's mentioned in the Laylatul Qadr. So it's one of those things that our ulama have actually advised us to read during the month of Ramadan, and specifically in the Laylatul Qadr. If you find this, I'm pretty sure most of us have gone through like self-help books. Like we look at those, the power of habit, or like the 7 habits of highly effective people, or maybe the meditations of Marcus Aurelius, things like that. Truly reading these ad'iyah is kind of sort of like a self-help book. In fact, you don't need to go to those self-help books if you have these traditions or if you have these supplications. It's very important to understand that these are supplications. You are asking Allah Azza wa Jal. It is an act of devotion. It's an act of worship. But more importantly, if you just take a moment to read the dua and to embody every sentence in the dua, then that in itself will transform you. That's the power of these supplications. Imam As-Sajjad alayhi salam, his jihad, according to the ulama, wasn't one of the sword. It was one of disseminating the teachings of Islam, and he did it most notably through the supplications. And we have an entire book that collects these supplications into one volume that we inherited. Before I begin reading the dua, it's important I want to give the title of my lecture, and as has been my habit in the past few nights, yesterday we spoke about, or 2 nights ago we spoke about taqwa, or the relationship between raja, hope, and fear, khawf. Today I want to talk about something that is important. I want to look at taqwa as a social virtue. So a lot of times when we spoke about taqwa, we spoke about it on the individual level. That spirituality, that individual spirituality. When I stand before Allah Azza wa Jal, whether it's on the night of power or the night of decree, or during the months of Ramadan, when I make that intention, when I have the right intention to fast, when I stay away and I avoid sins, that's always on an individual level. Well, what I want to do today is I want to take it, I want to expand on the concept and see how does it apply and how does it map onto and correspond to society. How do we build a community through taqwa? The important thing that I want you to realize, because the second work that we have from Imam As-Sajjad is known as a treatise of rights. So it's an entire letter from Imam As-Sajjad, or a treatise, that has all of the rights of Allah Azza wa Jal. And under the rights of Allah Azza wa Jal, you have all of the rights of mankind or humankind subsumed under that of Allah Azza wa Jal's right. So you see the right of Allah Azza wa Jal, you go over the right of the neighbor, the right of the parents, the right of your wives, your husbands, and so on and so forth, the children. And so you find all of these rights, and he expands on this, on these concepts, Imam al-Sajjad. Why is this important? Is because when we look at society at large, we see that it's built and it's been sort of structured based on a philosophy that is alien to Tawheed, a philosophy that is alien to the Islamic, if you want to say Islamic theology or the fundamentals of Islamic thought. That isn't something, that's not a charge that I make lightly. When you look at the modern world today, it's based on the philosophies of the thinkers and the philosophers that came out of the Enlightenment that took place in Europe. And that enlightenment, what is that enlightenment? That enlightenment means that the human being has become enlightened. And now he's thinking critically and he's thinking for himself, and now he's breaking away from tradition. He's breaking away from not only the monarchy, not only tyrants and dictators, not only the Pope, but also religion itself. You could even say that he's breaking away from Allah Azza wa Jal. He's sort of sidelined Allah. And they put a premium on thinking for yourself and the power of reason, or you want to say the intellect. Whereas when you look at Islam, Islam doesn't take that approach. Islam puts Allah Azza wa Jal in the center. Meaning Allah Azza wa Jal is at the sort of the center of everything Islamic. And so when you think of human rights, which is one of the legacies of the Enlightenment, you're thinking of, right, individual rights. You're thinking of something, sometimes you might say that even in the context of abortion, what happens? They start debating the rights of the mother versus the right of the fetus, and then they say, well, the fetus isn't actually a human being, so on and so forth. They keep going, but at the end of the day, the mother, and sometimes they might even acknowledge that the child is there. They might even acknowledge that there is life, but the mother's individual right trumps that of the child's. And so it always goes back to the individual. The individual is made to be supreme in the modern world. And that is something that we see every single day. When I'm sitting in my classroom and I have to talk to my children sometimes, or my students, not their children, but they're my students. I sometimes have to assert that authority. And I have to tell them, right, I'm your teacher. And sometimes they respond, they retort and say, well, it's my right. Because that's how we've grown up. And that's what we've took subconsciously. Consciously or subconsciously. You find many Muslims today, they've subconsciously adopted this because in America we don't have a religious identity. We don't have an identity based on religion or language or ethnicity or color. We have a civic identity. And that civic identity goes back to those founding principles and ideals of this country. And so when you think of the freedom of, right, the separation of church and state, secularism, when you think of individualism, when you think of the freedom of speech, the freedom of expression, the freedom to protest, so on and so forth, those are things that we hold dearly whether we know it or not. And so what we want to do is we want to put that against, and we want to evaluate that against the Islamic world. And we want to see what that takes place, what happens. What is the Islamic world and how does it differentiate from the, if you want to say, the Western world? But unfortunately now it's one big, because of globalization and because of many of the ideas in the West have kind of sort of washed up on the shores of our Islamic countries, then there's no real differentiation. So when we're looking at the modern world, we're looking at it as one where the individual reigns supreme, and we look at the Islamic world, or we look at Islamic thought, we look at the Quran and the logic of the Quran, and Allah Azza wa Jal reigns supreme. So I want you to keep that in mind. In the supplication, so we're going to go back and forth between the supplication of Imam al-Sajjad, the one that deals with the noble moral traits, and the treatise of rights that he also that we inherited and that was transmitted and narrated from him. I won't be reading all of it, it's a very long dua. I'm going to be reading passages of this dua. But I invite you guys to pick these up. Like I said, if the one thing that I can do, the one benefit that you guys can take away from these lectures is just simply to say, I heard in this lecture that there's a book called Nahj al-Balagha, let me look it up. There's a book called Sahifat al-Sajadiyya, let me look it up. There's a munajat called Munajat al-Sha'baniyya, or a munajat known as the Munajat of Amir al-Mu'mineen in the Masjid of Kufa. Let me see what this is. Let me read it for myself. In this dua, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, and cause my faith to reach the most perfect faith, and make my certainty the most excellent certainty. and take my intention to the best of intentions and my works to the best of works. So automatically, what do we see? What is the Imam asking right from the start? When we're thinking of a character, a virtuous person, when we're thinking of someone that has sort of reached human perfection, so to speak, someone who's allowed himself to achieve or attain all of the virtues, the very first thing that the Imam is talking about is that right intention vis-a-vis Allah Azza wa Jal. And why is that so important? So we know that it's important in terms of acts of worship. Why? Because without that right intention, what happens? Without that right intention, our acts of worship are spoiled. And so we want to set our intentions straight. And you remember, this is something that I said yesterday. One of the most important aspects, or one of the most important acts in this month is the act of what? Is the act of avoiding sin. When Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was asked, what is the most important act in this month? He didn't say a dua, he didn't say dhikr, he didn't say Quran. He said to avoid sins. And so even when I'm avoiding something or I'm going towards something, I'm going to the masjid or I'm staying away from the bar, for example, or I'm staying away from a place that's going to lead me to haram, I have to have that right intention. And that right intention is to do something for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. And we see that in the Ahlul Bayt. In Surah Al-Insan, when the Ahlul Bayt give their food, they give their food why? They give their food why? They give their food for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا. They didn't do it for a reward. If you look at Surah Al-Layl, Surah Al-Layl in the Quran, towards the end, the last chapters of the Quran, you'll find Surah Al-Layl. There's a very beautiful, there's a set of ayat that are relevant for us tonight, and that speak to this idea of not wanting anything other than Allah Azza wa Jal, not seeking anything other than the pleasure of Allah Azza wa Jal. He says, and he's talking about the fire. I'm going to read the English translation just because I have the Arabic memorized, but it's not 100%. So I'm just going to read the English translation for you guys. Far removed it will be, far removed from it will be the most pious. So you find in translations of the Quran, God-fearing or taqwa is indicated by or is translated as piety, pious, God-fearing, being wary of Allah Azza wa Jal. We already went through this, but just understand that piety here is rendered, or is in Arabic, means taqwa. So far removed from it will be the most pious, meaning the fire. It will be far removed from the fire. And then it says, who gives his wealth. In the Arabic, it says, الذي يؤتي الذي. See, that's why I didn't want to recite it in Arabic, because I will mess it up, and I don't want to mess up the Quran. He who gives his wealth in order to purify himself. So you see that the pious, how are they described? What is the attribute of the pious? He who gives his wealth in order to purify himself. And then it says something that's very important, that any religious, rational person has to sort of grasp. It says, nobody possesses any good thing which might constitute a reward for this person. Remember in the very few nights, what did I say? What did Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam say to his companions? He says, your worth is nothing less than Jannah. If you understand that and you grasp that, a person who's God-fearing, a mu'min, a religious person, a rational person, a true human being, what does he understand when he recognizes Allah Azza wa Jal's, His authority? What happens? What happens to him when he understands His creatorship, His lordship, His kingship? What happens? He understands that no one possesses any good which might constitute a reward for this person. That means there's no person or thing that might replace the reward that Allah Azza wa Jal has ready or set up for that person. It's not even a reward, because once you reach that level where you're completely selfless and you're seeking Allah Azza wa Jal, you're no longer seeking the hope, you no longer have the hope of reward. You're looking for something much more. And the ayat continue. For he seeks only the face of his Lord. ابتغاء وجه ربه الأعلى. That's the Arabic. He seeks only the face of his Lord. And then it says, and indeed he will be content. Meaning, what happens when a mu'min what happens when someone understands this or grasps this? He automatically, it's almost by nature, by default, it's almost like as if he's forced to seek only Allah Azza wa Jal because he's grasped reality. He's realized that every single person is insignificant in front of Allah Azza wa Jal. There's nothingness before Allah Azza wa Jal. And Allah Azza wa Jal is absolute. And He is the rich. And in everything, everything in this world, and everything in the world of existence stems from Allah Azza wa Jal. So what are we seeing here? We're seeing that the Imam is setting right setting the stage for how to acquire these noble traits, these character traits, these virtues. He's saying the very first thing is that we have to set our intention right. And we see it in the Quran. If you read other passages of Dua al-Makarim al-Akhlaq, yesterday I was approached by one of the sisters and she asked a very important question. She goes, what happens when can religion be excessive? And can we go to the extremes? Can we be too excessive when forgiving other people? When being virtuous or having akhlaq, can we do that? When the Ahlul Bayt in Surah Al-Insan dispense all their food, isn't that a bit too excessive? When Imam Al-Hasan salamullah alayhi is known to have dispensed his wealth twice over, all his wealth, isn't that a bit excessive? And I said a few things. I said, one, we shouldn't fall into the fallacy of al-qiyas bil-ghayr. Al-qiyas bil-ghayr means judging others by one's own self, meaning I'm looking at Imam al-Hasan's actions and I'm saying, well, that's a bit excessive. It's a bit excessive for whom? It's a bit excessive for you as an individual. You are not at that stage. When it comes to Ibrahim's sacrifice that we spoke about, it seems a bit excessive. It seems humanly impossible, but that's in relation to whom? That's in relation to you, a common person, to me, a common person. When we think of the Ahlul Bayt and they give and they give and they give and they sacrifice, when you think of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam and he sacrificed everything, how do we make sense of this idea of this principle known as la ifrat wala tafrid? Thank you. This idea of avoiding extremes, avoiding excessive, right? The both extremes, both ends of the spectrum. Here's the solution to that, the answer to that. It's to say, look at the end of that act. Always look at the end of that act. If I go and I sacrifice everything for the sake of my corporate job, that's going to seem a bit too excessive. Because the end itself is not noble. The end isn't noble. So I'm always looking at the end. What is the end? If I go and for example, I do something, let's say I jump, I want to show my friends, right? I want to show my friends that I'm fearless. So I jump off and we're at some resort or we're at beach and there's a cliff and I'm going to say, I'm going to jump off the cliff and I end up jumping off the cliff and I injure myself and I hurt myself. What happens? What takes place? I injured myself. Can I be considered courageous? No, I'm going to be considered, right, foolish. Because that's excessive, right? That's excessive courage, you could say. You could argue. How do I know when do I step onto the battlefield, so to speak? To give the best example, because when you think of courage, you're thinking of the battlefield. If I step on the battlefield, why is it that someone is distinguished from another? Why is someone considered a shaheed and someone else isn't considered a shaheed? Why is someone considered excessive and another person is praised as a virtuous person? Because that person has a noble end, and that noble end is nothing other than fi sabilillah. When you do things fi sabilillah, then you cannot put a cap on it. So when I give my food fi sabilillah like the Ahlul Bayt did, or when I'm willing to sacrifice my own son for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal because I've recognized His authority, then there isn't any extreme. There's no extreme when it comes to Allah Azza wa Jal. When it comes to akhlaq, and there's that famous statement from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It says what? It says, cultivate, right? Take on the character traits of Allah Azza wa Jal. تَخَلَّقُوا بِأَخْلَاقِ اللَّهِ. Take on the traits of Allah Azza wa Jal. And when you think of the traits of Allah Azza wa Jal, they're infinite. Meaning the generosity of Allah Azza wa Jal is infinite. The mercy of Allah Azza wa Jal is infinite. When you think of Dua Qamil, this is something that I always give in terms of how we interact with other people. Allah Azza wa Jal says, or Amir al-Mu'mineen salamullah alayhi, is asking Allah Azza wa Jal, He says, Ya Sari' al-Rida, someone who's quick to forgive, someone who's quick to please. And so you should also take on that trait according to the famous hadith. When we look at Dua Makarim al-Akhlaq, what are we asking? What do we see in terms of society and building a community? The Imam says, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. And you see, by the way, in almost every part and passage of the dua, you see a salawat. And in that way, if someone asks, what is tawassul? That is the best form of tawassul. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. So he says, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, and replace for me the animosity of the people of hatred with love. And then he keeps going on and on and on. He says, and resist him who is dishonest toward me with good counsel, and repay him who separates from me with gentle devotion, and reward him who deprives me with free giving, and recompense, yani give him who cuts me off with joining, and oppose him who slanders me with excellent mention. What are we seeing in this dua? We're seeing almost something that we would think of as ideal, like a utopia. If someone were to cut me off, I'm going to join him. If someone were going to say something bad or backbite me, what am I gonna? I'm gonna mention him, but I'm gonna mention him in an excellent way. If someone says something hurts me or injures me, how am I gonna repay that? I'm gonna repay it with good, with beautiful doing. So you might see that in kind of sort of sometimes practically speaking, this might seem very difficult. He keeps on, he says, and give thanks, and then he says, Allah, clothe me with the ornaments of God-fearing. Yani clothe me with taqwa, clothe me with the garment of taqwa, through spreading justice, restraining rage, quenching the flame of hate, bringing together the people of separation, correcting discord, and so on and so on and so on. What you realize here is what might seem excessive for most people isn't excessive at all when I have in my eyes, when my eyes are on Allah Azza wa Jal. It's like I've seen the majesty of Allah Azza wa Jal. And I see that anything that's with anyone else other than Allah Azza wa Jal is something that is little, something of little worth. I see that my worth is Jannah. I'm after Jannah, I'm after the pleasure of Allah. Relax, I'm after what the Imam says in dua or munajat al-sha'baniyya, that the light of the heart pierces, or the heart pierces the veils of light. That I've sort of grasped, I've reached that station of majesty, I've recognized His majesty, I've grasped it. And so someone might say, in terms of society, these things might seem difficult. We have to aim for these sort of virtues. That might seem excessive. It's not being foolish, by the way. It's not turning the cheek. But it's approaching society. But how do we approach it? What does the Imam say? Ikhlas, and taqwa. Someone who fears Allah Azza wa Jal, he looks at, we said yesterday in my answer, I said, if someone hurts me, injured me, I look at this person as a creature of Allah Azza wa Jal. He can't do anything. And so if I reach out I'm not going to sort of put myself in harm's way, but I might say, Assalamu alaikum. I might mention him in a good way. I'm not going to engage in that because that's distracting me from Allah Azza wa Jal. So we want right intention and we want taqwa. I want to go and mention 2 verses and then we'll wrap up. These 2 verses, and something that I've realized in the course of these lectures, is that if I mention taqwa and I bring all the ayat regarding taqwa that start with taqullah, for example, they're endless. They're endless. And so you realize that's an argument to say that this is one of the most important virtues, and that's why we're dwelling on it. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم فاتقوا الله ما استطعتم. Be wary of Allah. Fear Allah as much as you are able. So some people say that this talks about the incapacity and the weakness of man. That human beings are ultimately weak and they have no capacity. And so Allah Azza wa Jalla isn't going to give us a taklif that we can't carry, that we have no capacity for. Because there's another ayah in the Quran that says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ حَقَّ تُقَاتِهِ. Be wary of God as is the rightful due of His wariness. Remember when we said when we think of rights, we're thinking of God's rights against us? His right is to fear Him, is to be wary of Him. But in the other verse, in the first command, what does it say? فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Yani be wary as much as you're able to. Some commentators of the Quran say this. They say that there's a conflict between these two commands. One command is saying to be wary of Allah Azza wa Jal, to have that fearful wariness of Allah Azza wa Jal as much as you can, as much as you are humanly possible, or as much as you can bear, or as much as you're able to. The other one is saying, fear Allah as His right, as much as His right is. So you're looking at His right, the quality. You're looking at the sort of, that I can't sort of fear Allah based on my own terms. I have to fear based on His right. So they say, well, there's a conflict here because it's almost like saying the Quran, if you put these two verses together, there's a conflict. And it's almost as if saying that one ayah is saying you cannot ever reach that. So Allah is saying, okay, fine, whatever you can possibly do. Allama Tabatabai says, no, that's not the case. There isn't a conflict between these two verses. The idea of فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ refers to quantity, not quality. Whereas the other verse, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ حَقَّ تُقَاتِهِ, meaning what? Refers to the quality. So it's one of quantity versus quality. And so they complement one another. There's no conflict between the other. Because if there is a conflict, that's a problem. Because if there's a conflict, the ulama will some say, well, the first command repeals the second command. Because Allah Azza wa Jalla, as much as possible, and so it's humanly impossible to actually do that. So Allah Azza wa Jalla revealed the second verse. Or vice versa. Some might say that Allah Azza wa Jalla first did it in incremental steps. So He first said as much as possible, and then so you do that, you sort of incrementally go towards taqwa, and then at the end, what did He say? Then haqqa tuqatih. Then you, right, so it's incrementally until you get there. Allama Tabatabai says no. Both complement one another. They're talking about two different things. One is talking about the quality, and one is talking about quantity. So here when Allah Azza wa Jal says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullaha haqqa tuqatih, I really have to reach, right, I have to observe God's right against me in this regard. In the other one where He says, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ, be wary of God as much as you are able, He's referring to all aspects, or all accounts, or all instances of taqwa. So now, when I'm thinking of every majal, every place, every instance where I can actually practice taqwa, that is what Allah Azza wa Jalla is commanding me towards. So now when I'm thinking of those, the people of envy, or the people who have hurt me, when I'm thinking of even not these sort of, not in terms of silat al-raham or bonding with people that have hurt me in some way, but also that of my parents, that of my neighbors, that of my teachers, that of my students, that of my children, I have to, in every single instance, according to this verse, I have to practice taqwa. I have to be God-fearing. And how do I do it? I have to do it, one that is in accordance with His right, with Allah Azza wa Jal's right. And if we go to the treatise of Imam al-Sajjad, what is God's right? What is God's supreme right against us as human beings? It's none other than Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And the greatest right of God against you is that you worship Him without associating anything with Him. And when you do that with ikhlas, with sincerity, He has made it binding upon Himself to give you sufficiency in the affair of this world and the next. Remember, ikhlas, or not associating others, that grave sin of shirk, one of the gravest sins in Islam, where you associate others with Allah Azza wa Jal, isn't just simply an outward one. It's also an inward one. So for example, that right intention and having the right intention when it comes to acts of worship, that is also what some have said as hidden shirk. I want to avoid that wrong intention. So the greatest right of Allah Azza wa Jal is what? Is to associate associate Him with no one, or associate avoiding that shirk. So now when I'm thinking of a community based on taqwa, a community based on the rights of Allah Azza wa Jal, and how do we achieve all of those rights? How do I safeguard all of those rights? How do I achieve the most noble traits and go beyond just our legalistic obligations in the Sharia? It's having taqwa and having ikhlas. And here when we think of our responsibility and our taklif and being God-fearing in the month of Ramadan, in this time when millions of people are fleeing their homes or have no homes to go to, or when you think of the town squares of South Lebanon or the town squares of Gaza, or even places like Syria and Yemen and Iraq, when you think of other places, oppressed people, how are we God-fearing when it comes to these people? Is it that we're spending our days eating the most lavish foods, overeating in some cases, overindulging in the foods that Allah Azza wa Jal has given us, dressing with the best clothes, and the most excellent clothes, worrying about social media, and God knows what? While there's right now, as we speak, a genocide, here's the thing about Islam. Islam isn't just about, that's why I wanted to kind of compare it with human rights versus God's rights, and what we see in the modern world or the Western world and the Islamic world, or what should ideally be the case in the Islamic world, is that those who have called for human rights and in the name of human rights have completely lost touch with their humanity. And religion is the only source, is the only way for us not to abandon our humanity. Because Allah Azza wa Jal created us with an original nature, a natural state. And that natural state, according to Amir al-Mu'mineen, is La ilaha illallah. And when we deviate from La ilaha illallah, then everything is open. Now I become selfless. Now I become selfish. Now my hawa is the God that I'm worshipping. My own whims are my God that I'm worshipping. But if we break the idol of the self, if we break the idol of egoism, if we break that idol of individualism, and we turn to Allah Azza wa Jal, and we fear Allah Azza wa Jal as He should be feared, then Allah, not only is Allah Azza wa Jal going to give us success, but that we see that humanity as a whole can no longer stand silent while there are 1 billion or 1 million people being killed, while children are being torn to pieces. It's impossible. You want to know why we've given up on it? You know why it happens even though we're seeing it live? It's because we've turned away from Allah Azza wa Jal. Because now it's my hawa. It's me. There's no rights against me. I have nothing to do with Palestine. I have nothing to do with people in China. I have nothing to do with people, right? I'm living here. So what is in it for me? So we want to turn to Allah Azza wa Jal. And we want to use that garment. Remember that garment that we wear close to our skin, as Amir al-Mu'mineen says, which is taqwa. And when we have that, we're always going to be God-fearing. And we're always going to have that sense of responsibility. But at the same time, we're looking towards Allah Azza wa Jal and only seeking Him. Walhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad.